Hello, lovely to be here. I'm here to tell you a story. So for much of my 20s, I lived in a community house in a bunk bed. Because we shared that space, it meant that we could have a spare room that was open for anyone who needed it. Sometimes that person was street homeless, and sometimes they were just a friend. We raided supermarket bins and had big communal meals, and it was a place that was full of activism. It was amazing, but living in that bunk bed wouldn't suit us now. It was a really intense space. So it meant that 4 years ago, me and my partner married, moved out, and lived in a nice anonymous semi where we went to B&Q and bought 16 tester pots of different muted greens. Now, it has been an unusual year for us this year, not just because we are 5 weeks into parenting a newborn, something which has completely redefined what counts as a clean t-shirt. You may see the baby in the audience being joggled about, trying not to cry right now, but also because we are thinking again whether we can live in a way that better reflects our values, whether there are greener, kinder, fairer, more compassionate ways to live. One way that we're doing this is that we've moved for a trial period into a community farm in County Durham. Another thing is that as we've plodded through the trimesters, we have been touring the UK and Europe's alternative communities, finding out what's out there. And that has partly been for a book that's coming out next month, got the plug in early, and partly our own journey. So I started off at the Bruderhof. They are a 300-strong Christian communities where individuals live completely without money. And I was there in my first trimester, working in their toy factory, having the ginger chews to stave off the morning sickness as we drilled the children's toys together. And that journey finished 6 months later at Britain's last remaining naturist community, where I was bearing bump and rump across the lawns. And in between that, there were all manner of different ones. So we had 1970s hippy communes still going today, wellness-focused co-living spaces, one dubbed as London's poshest commune, Mason and Fifth, residential rehabs where people were recovering from alcohol and drugs, Edinburgh's disability-inclusive house shares, cooperative spaces in Amsterdam, hacker houses, spaces with tech activists, crypto communities, Buddhist spaces. Although these were massively different communities, crypto investors and off-gridders, the over-80s and the under-ones, religious devotees and young professionals, they had in common that they were trying to rewrite the script on how we do housing. Now, next slide, please. Research. Oh, this is our community house. I didn't do it too early. This is the first slide. So this shows a little bit of that amazing kind of crazy space that we used to live in. Next slide, please. So this is the journey that we went on. Next slide, please. Oh, I've not done it quick enough, have I here? So research has long shown us that our sense of community is in decline. Just 40% of us feel we can trust those living without us. Less than half feel a sense of belonging within our neighbourhoods, and a quarter of us feel they've become worse places to live. Another survey found that just 30% of over 45s, 14% of 25 to 44s, and just 5% of 18 to 25s were on first name terms with their neighbours. So looking at it like that is a problem that is likely to worsen. Loneliness. A third of people feel often or always lonely. And if you look at that graph, we're not talking people who are living on their own in care homes, we're talking about every demographic. The impact of this is widespread. Not only does loneliness mean that you're more likely to suffer anxiety and depression, it means that you're 50% more likely to have a heart attack. That's from a Swedish study. Long-term loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Next slide. But it's not just our individual health that is suffering, it's environmental health. When we consume, we tend to consume in household units, whether that is your Netflix subscriptions, or your energy bills, or something bigger like spare rooms and kitchens we are consuming in those units. Now, if we all do that in smaller units, that is fantastic for profit, but less good for the environment. And at some point, very soon, I would say already, that is going to be the more significant metric. All of this is in a context of a property market which has become increasingly inaccessible. It has absolutely spiraled out of sync with wages. These are just some statistics here that are the averages for the country. So house prices have risen by 68% over the past 10 years, according to ONS data, and wages have only grown 31% during that time. Now, that's an average statistic. If you apply that to where we are living in cities, lots of people, lots of millennials, lots of people in younger generations, then that is a much more stark difference. The amount you need to get on the property ladder has got much, much more. This means that more people are living in temporary accommodation than ever before. More people are unable to buy. More families than ever are living in hostel accommodation. We're working longer and longer hours to be able to afford those costs of rent. My generation has been dubbed the burnout generation because of those hours. So, next slide. Why is it that communal living, which could provide a solution, it wouldn't suit everybody, but it could provide a solution to lots of these things, why is it not more popular? Perhaps it is because when we think of communalism, there's a few things that come to mind. It might be Louis Theroux going to visit the swingers community, sort of awkwardly watching on a deep piled carpet while no one wears a clothes, giving a sort of uncomfortable voiceover. It could be your imitation guru on the right there, who seems to have a kind of disproportionately young and disproportionately female following. You could have these guys on the left trying to solve a problem like Miriam, or it's all just a bit kumbaya. In fact, it's a much more broad church. So this is the first community that I'm going to tell you about. I've got 4 little snapshots. This is Old Hall Community, and they were founded in the 70s, a kind of classic hippy commune. They are based over 70 acres, and they are in a former friary there on the left. They live very much in communion with the land. They are a community that starts at age 1 and goes up to people in their 80s. In fact, on the land, people who started that community lived out their whole lives and are buried there as well. Now, this being so intergenerational means that there's that support there for families. I spoke to one mum, Helen, and she was parenting on her own, and she told me that there's no way she'd have been able to return to work unless she had that community who were able to go and pick up her son and bring her home. And she's now been able to return to work as a palliative care doctor. The low costs of living of this community of 50 also mean that almost nobody I met there worked full-time. It took the pressure off. This is Die Torteluwen. This is a community in Amsterdam. Iris and Alexander live in this city which suffers, like so many other global cities, from a lack of affordable housing. They realised that after graduating from university, they would not be able to stay in the city that they loved. That diversity that makes Amsterdam a dynamic place is being squeezed out. Now, the week I met them, they had just agreed with the city municipality to sign over a piece of land to their cooperative in such a way that meant that it could never fall into private ownership. They were going to collaboratively design this space and collaboratively go through that process of management as well, so that rather than having to make it about profit, they were able to make it about seeking affordable housing. So this space, once it's built, Die Torteluwen, will be affordable accommodation in perpetuity. It will never be a piece of land which needs to serve as capital. Next. This is Spielplatz community, Britain's oldest and last remaining naturist community. I met a guy called Graham who lived there. Now, the way they described naturism to me was much in the same way that my generation would talk about sexuality. They would say, "Oh, I've been in the closet, and finally I'm able to live freely." It was talked about in terms of people being able to reveal and live out their true identities. It was interesting, one thing I met here, and actually across lots of communities, was also a massive increase in people who were neurodiverse. So particularly at the naturist community, there were a lot of people who were on the autism spectrum and suffered with kind of sensory issues around clothing, and they were able to feel free to live without clothes. Now, whether it's your cup of tea or not, these guys had decided they wanted to live in a particular way and felt that the prejudices they experienced in society didn't allow them to do that, and so they found safety in numbers. The critical mass of community living meant that they could reconfigure what was of value to them and live freely. Next. Now this is Mason and Fifth, the one I just mentioned before, London's poshest commune. This is the Italian building, 28 micro apartments in the middle of London. The co-living space also came with a schedule of fitness, meditation, nutrition, well-being. And the way they designed this is they reverse engineered the space according to what's called WELL certification, which is looking at how spaces help us live well and healthy lives. Now, it's not cheap to live here, but the guy who founded it, Ben Provisa, he told me the houses of the future will not be ones we have to maintain. Instead, they will look after us. I met a woman called Jenna. She's a young professional. She's moved here from Canada. She told me I was nervous to move to London because friends had told me that London was busy, polluted, noisy, lonely, and difficult to meet people. She said, that is not what my experience has been of London. And the thing I found really interesting about that is that this housing, which allowed her to live in a healthy way, hadn't just changed the way she felt about home, it changed her way she felt about the city. It made that city feel a good community. It made that city feel sustainable. It was interesting that she's talked about other people say London is busy, but I haven't found it to be that way. The way she lived in that home had changed the velocity of the city. It's a place where lots of people feel burnout and loneliness. If you scratch the surface, there's lots of stories that go into this. It's a much broader footprint. It's Helen being able to return to work, the guys at Spielplatz finding freedom in numbers, Die Tortelluen making housing affordable, accessible. It's the guys at the Priory having that pressure released from full-time stress of work and enabled to live just plodding along with the land and with the seasons. It's Jenna finding London a different place. So where did our journey lead? Well, I would love to tell you that I had assessed all the options and we found the perfect one, and why don't you all come and join? But we are still living that experiment. We have moved in fully now to that community farm, and we are working out what it looks like to do conflict in communication and finance in those kind of bigger groups. It's not the short way round. Community living is the long way round. All these decisions that we've been making as a 2, we are now making as a 6. I can't tell you that we will live there forever, that will be our kind of, we've found the solution. But bringing our daughter home to that space, which is a community space where young people come and have a growing club on site, where we run a community food project, where there are always people to help with the stuff of life. So we were taken off all the cleaning and the cooking rotas in the last month as we've had the baby. There's always someone to hold her while I have a shower. And bringing her home to that space felt more like the world we wanted to bring her into than that anonymous semi we'd left behind. Co-living is set to be mainstream. Almost every community I visited was experiencing a surge of interest. Across the UK now, there are 24,000 co-living units in the pipeline. Whilst multi-family households are still the smallest household type, the ONS reported in 2020 that they are the fastest growing household type. Now, we may live in community forever, or we may explore different ways of having community. It's interesting, you kind of spoke about the cafe before, because that is also a community space that, for me, has provided that point of connection and that point of equality. We're still living that experiment. But I think as the world feels more and more precarious, as people are struggling to make rent and bills, and as mental health continues to grow as an epidemic, I think Jack Johnson may be right that we are better together. Thank you.
Sorry if I was a little slow on the slides, but I think we got there in the end.
Are you all right?
What I found was really interesting is that a lot of this, to some extent, you'd say, God, housing has become so expensive that we have no other choice but to force ourselves to live in these alternative arrangements. But I had listened to an interview by an author named Sebastian Junger, who is famous for the book A Perfect Storm, with the boats and all that sort of stuff. And he'd written a follow-up book called Tribe. And one of the things he talked about in the book was about this strange phenomenon that's documented time and again when the West was taking over America and pushing further and further Indian territory, where time and again white Westerners would be captured by Indians and then would elect to stay with the Indians. Whereas the reverse is rarely true. So Indians that were captured, once they were released, they went straight back to their tribes, in fact, if you will. And also, talking about the rise of basically mental health issues as we have modernized, as people have chosen to live further apart and so on and so forth. And so I guess to me, my question is, in general, in your findings, do people, I think many people might think, oh God, the idea of collective living, having to give up your freedom, is it actually a feature and not a bug? Is it actually something that, like, don't worry about, like, for example, the last example in London, you're saying that's not a cheap alternative. It's still expensive, but people are clearly choosing to be a part of it. Are you finding the collective living is actually part of the kind of, the attractiveness or what keeps people wanting to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's happened in the movement over the last few years is that sharing has become something that's aspirational. And part of that is about climate, it is about loneliness. But I also think there's a bit of a shift in culture where people have seen, I don't know if you glimpsed over the pandemic, people connecting with neighbours in a way they hadn't before. Mm-hmm. Membership to Nextdoor skyrocketed. That's the app where you connect with your neighbours. People were suddenly starting to come out in the streets. And I think that we absolutely have glimpsed, do you know what? This isn't just let's push people into smaller and smaller spaces so we can bring up profit. How can we do housing in a way which is healthy and which is good? And part of what is healthy and good, both for us and for the planet, is living a bit more closely together. Now, of course, that is not going to be for everyone. Some of these examples are incredibly intense and would suit different stages in life. Families might want their own space a bit more, but absolutely I think what we're seeing is a shift in terms of that sharing be aspirational. I mean, look at private jets. That's become quite bad taste, hasn't it now? Mm-hmm. Lives a taste, people having
I've never been on one, but yeah.
Yeah, well, there you
I've
go.
heard.
This kind of like ginormous private assets, I think we're starting to turn against them. And, look at the reaction to kind of the royal family taking a lot of private jets. People are now saying, ooh, that amount of private assets, it doesn't fit the world we live in.
Yeah, I mean, one of the frustrating things about critiques of modern capitalism, so I think capitalism is largely a good thing, but is that it treats, we get into that separate. That's for the next discussion. But that we treat all capitalism as so someone who is a slumlord and is able to squeeze more and more profit out of their incredibly decrepit, horrible apartments because they can just charge more money because it's in London or wherever. That's not the kind of capitalism we should encourage. Someone that creates a new drug that's cures cancer or some form of cancer, you think, well, yeah, I think that's probably something we should encourage, sort of thing. So I think I would like to see more debate about a better capitalism versus just it sucks or it's amazing, if you will.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I like a well-regulated
So, but let's get back to the original
But
topic.
go on. Yeah.
I think one of the exciting things is that, exactly, you addressed the point, which is that when people think of collective living, it's used to think it's going to be hippies or naturists or, you know what. And I guess this idea, I was thinking to myself, it'd be great if you have like a really corporate collective living situation where like they're all like clean Nazis and everything's always got to be super clean. And do you see like a rise of more and more, like, if you will, micro communities that, obviously, around, it could be based around religion, it could be based around lifestyles, it could be based around that you're yuppies or whatever it might be, or naturists, as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. The one of the communities that I loved connecting with, because they're so different from my own experience of communal living, was a community of digital nomads that lived together in the Savoy in Madeira. And they had these like phenomenal spaces and all kind of communicated on Slack channels, and every night someone would run a seminar that you could turn up to on, breath work or tax avoidance. It was a kind of in many ways, the opposite of what my experience of communalism was. But I kind of thought, okay, what does it look like if we have the way that we do businesses and the way that we do kind of social enterprises and activism much more connected? I was talking to somebody at the dinner last night, and he was saying, the reason that we were able to start this tech company is because I was living at my business partner's mum's house at the time, and so we just were coding all day and all night. And there is something about kind of an energy of collectivism. Like, if it was just a kind of worthy thing to do, it wouldn't be worth doing. But actually, it's got to be fun, dynamic, enjoyable. Otherwise, people aren't going to, martyr themselves to living in some communal home.
Mim, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Great to see you again. Thank you.